You are Maria Theresa of Austria, sitting in the gilded chambers of the Royal Alcazar in Madrid in the year 1660. The silk of your wedding gown rustles against your trembling hands as you clutch a leather-bound manuscript that will dictate every intimate moment of your married life. Your new husband, King Philip IV of Spain, stands beside you with the casual indifference of a man who has never questioned the grotesque traditions of his bloodline. The document before you isn't a love letter or a collection of romantic poetry. It's something far more sinister, a detailed manual of bedroom conduct written by generations of Habsburg monarchs, each adding their own twisted requirements to an already disturbing collection of royal edicts. This manuscript contains rules so explicit, so degrading, and so psychologically damaging that they would make a brothel keeper blush. You will be expected to follow these instructions not out of love or desire, but because they are the sacred traditions of Europe's most powerful dynasty. Your body, your dignity, your very soul will become instruments in a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to preserve royal bloodlines through methods that blur the line between marriage and systematic abuse. Tonight, as you prepare for your wedding night, you have no idea that these bedroom edicts have been shaping Habsburg marriages for over 2 centuries, creating a legacy of trauma, dysfunction, and genetic catastrophe that will echo through European history. You are about to become both victim and perpetrator of traditions so twisted that they defy comprehension. Before diving into these forbidden stories of royal depravity, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these dark secrets together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the most disturbing chapters of human history. The Habsburg bedroom edicts weren't born from passion or even political necessity. They emerged from something far more sinister, a systematic approach to human breeding that treated royal marriages like livestock management. The Spanish branch of the Habsburg dynasty, ruling from the late 15th century through the early 18th century, developed these intimate protocols as part of their obsession with maintaining bloodline purity. What they created was a manual for marital relations so detailed and degrading that it transformed the marriage bed into a theatre of humiliation and control. Picture yourself in the year 1496, when the foundation of these edicts was first laid by Queen Isabella of Castile. Fresh from completing the Reconquista and funding Columbus's voyages, Isabella turned her formidable organizational skills toward a new project, ensuring that future Habsburg marriages would produce heirs while maintaining absolute royal control over every aspect of reproduction. She commissioned a secret council of physicians, priests, and court officials to develop what would become known as the Régimen Real del Lecho, the royal bedroom regime. The manuscript that resulted from their deliberations was unlike anything that had existed before in European royal courts. Where other dynasties might have informal traditions or general expectations about royal marriages, the Habsburgs created a step-by-step instruction manual that dictated everything from the positioning of furniture in the royal bedchamber to the exact words that must be spoken during intimate moments. The document was bound in red leather, sealed with the royal arms, and passed down from monarch to monarch like a sacred relic. But here's what made these edicts particularly horrifying. They weren't just about producing heirs. They were about power, control, and the systematic degradation of royal wives who were treated as breeding stock rather than human beings. The manuscript contained detailed instructions for psychological manipulation, physical positioning that maximized royal male pleasure while ignoring female comfort entirely, and ritualistic elements that transformed intimate moments into religious ceremonies designed to reinforce male dominance. The edicts divided royal marriages into distinct phases, each with its own set of requirements and restrictions. The first phase, called the periodo de sometimiento, or period of submission, lasted for the first year of marriage, and was designed to break down any resistance the new queen might have to the more extreme requirements that would follow. During this phase, royal wives were required to demonstrate their complete obedience through increasingly degrading acts that had nothing to do with producing children and everything to do with establishing psychological control. Queen Joanna of Castile, known to history as Joanna the Mad, was among the first royal wives subjected to these protocols when she married Philip the Handsome in 1496. The contemporary accounts, written in coded language by court physicians, describe a woman who entered marriage as an intelligent and spirited princess, but emerged from her first year as a broken shell of her former self. The edicts required her to perform daily rituals of submission that included kneeling naked before her husband each morning, reciting scripted apologies for her female nature, and submitting to physical examinations by court physicians who documented every aspect of her body's response to the breeding program. The second phase, known as the Periodo de Fertilization, or period of fertilization, began once the queen had demonstrated sufficient submission and was deemed ready for the primary purpose of royal marriage, producing male heirs. This phase contained the most explicit and disturbing content in the entire manuscript, with detailed instructions that treated human reproduction like animal husbandry. Royal couples were required to follow specific schedules based on astrological calculations, maintain precise physical positions documented with anatomical diagrams, and perform ritualistic acts before, during, and after intimate encounters. The manuscript contained over 40 different positioning requirements, each designed to maximize the possibility of male conception while ensuring that the queen experienced minimal pleasure or emotional connection during the process. Court physicians were required to be present during many of these encounters, taking notes and providing real-time guidance to ensure proper adherence to the protocols. The psychological impact on royal wives was considered irrelevant. They were instruments in a breeding program, not participants in a marriage. What made these edicts even more disturbing was their religious justification. The Habsburg court developed an elaborate theological framework that portrayed these degrading practices as sacred duties blessed by God and necessary for the preservation of divine royal bloodlines. Queens who resisted or showed distress during these encounters were subjected to spiritual counseling by specially trained priests who used guilt, shame, and threats of eternal damnation to ensure compliance. The third phase, called the Periodo de Mantenimiento, or period of maintenance, governed the behavior of royal wives throughout their pregnancies and continued for the rest of their married lives. This phase contained detailed requirements about everything from diet and exercise to emotional expression and social interaction. Pregnant queens were treated like prize livestock, monitored constantly by physicians and subjected to treatments that prioritized fetal development over maternal health or comfort. The edicts also contained specific instructions for dealing with royal wives who failed to produce male heirs, became pregnant with daughters, or showed signs of mental distress from the constant degradation. These women faced additional humiliation and punishment, including public ceremonies where they were required to confess their failures and beg forgiveness from their husbands and the court. The psychological torture was systematic and unrelenting, designed to break down any sense of personal worth or individual identity. The enforcement of these edicts was overseen by a secret organization within the Habsburg court known as the Custodios del Régimen, or Keepers of the Regime. This group consisted of senior court officials, physicians, and clergy who monitored royal marriages and ensured strict adherence to the protocols. They maintained detailed records of every aspect of royal intimate life, creating an archive of degradation that documented centuries of systematic abuse disguised as royal tradition. The enforcement mechanisms became increasingly sophisticated under successive Habsburg rulers, with each generation adding new layers of control and humiliation to an already nightmarish system. King Philip II, who ruled from 1556 to 1598, expanded the edicts to include detailed surveillance protocols that transformed the royal bedchamber into what we might now recognize as a torture chamber, disguised as a sacred space. Under Philip's editions, known as the Enmiendas de la Vigilancia or surveillance amendments, royal wives were subjected to constant observation by specially trained female attendants called the observadoras reales. These women, usually drawn from minor noble families desperate for royal favour, were required to document every aspect of the Queen's behaviour, from her facial expressions during intimate encounters to the exact words she spoke in moments of distress. Their reports, written in a coded script developed specifically for this purpose, were compiled into monthly assessments that determined whether the Queen was adequately fulfilling her duties or required additional correction. The psychological impact of this constant surveillance was devastating. Queen Elizabeth of Valois, Philip's third wife, left behind a secret journal hidden in the walls of her private chapel that provides a rare glimpse into the mental anguish these protocols created. Written in a mixture of French and Latin to avoid detection, her entries reveal a woman slowly losing her sanity under the weight of systematic dehumanization. She wrote of feeling like a specimen in a laboratory, constantly examined and evaluated by people who saw her not as a human being, but as a complex piece of breeding equipment that might malfunction at any moment. The most disturbing aspect of the Habsburg bedroom edicts was how they evolved to incorporate new forms of psychological manipulation as court physicians gained deeper understanding of human psychology. The fourth phase, added during the reign of Philip III, was called the Periodo de Refinamiento, or Period of Refinement. This phase introduced techniques designed to create emotional dependency and learned helplessness in royal wives, ensuring their complete psychological submission even when physical surveillance wasn't possible. Queens were subjected to carefully orchestrated cycles of punishment and reward that created trauma bonds with their tormentors. They might be subjected to days of isolation and humiliation, followed by brief periods of kindness and attention, creating a psychological pattern that made them grateful for the smallest mercies from the same people who were systematically destroying them. Court physicians documented these techniques with clinical precision, treating the psychological manipulation of royal wives as a form of scientific experiment. The genetic consequences of the Habsburg obsession with bloodline purity became increasingly apparent as these bedroom edicts were passed down through generations. The systematic inbreeding that these protocols encouraged and enforced led to the physical and mental deterioration that would eventually end the Spanish Habsburg line entirely. King Charles II, the last Spanish Habsburg ruler, was so physically and mentally impaired by centuries of inbreeding that he was known as Charles the Bewitched. He was unable to speak clearly until age 4, couldn't walk until age 8, and suffered from numerous physical deformities that made him barely recognizable as human. But the connection between the bedroom edicts and the dynasty's genetic collapse goes deeper than simple inbreeding. The systematic trauma inflicted on royal mothers affected their ability to carry healthy pregnancies to term and provide adequate care for their children. The constant stress, malnutrition from dietary restrictions, and physical abuse documented in the protocols created conditions that increased infant mortality and contributed to the developmental problems that plagued Habsburg heirs. The legacy of these edicts extended far beyond the Habsburg court itself. Other European royal families, envious of Spanish power and wealth, began adopting modified versions of these protocols for their own dynasties. The French court, under Louis XIV, implemented similar surveillance and control mechanisms, while the Austrian Habsburgs maintained their own version of the bedroom edicts well into the 18th century. The degradation of royal wives became a standard feature of European monarchical culture, normalized and institutionalized across multiple generations. The documents themselves were eventually scattered and hidden as the Spanish Habsburg line ended and new dynasties took power. Some were destroyed by embarrassed successors, others were sealed in secret archives, and a few found their way into private collections where they remained hidden for centuries. It wasn't until the 20th century that historians began to piece together the full scope of what these protocols had entailed, and even today, many archives remain sealed or restricted. As we close this exploration of one of history's most disturbing examples of systematic abuse disguised as royal tradition, we return to that gilded chamber where Maria Theresa sits with her wedding night instructions. She had no way of knowing that she was about to become part of a centuries-old system designed to destroy her humanity in service to dynastic power. Her story, like those of countless royal wives before her, represents the terrible price paid by women who became instruments in the pursuit of political control. The Habsburg bedroom edicts remind us that power corrupts not just through grand political schemes, but through the intimate degradation of individual human beings. They show us how systems of oppression can become so normalized and institutionalized that they're seen as sacred traditions rather than systematic abuse. Most importantly, they demonstrate that behind every glittering royal court and every magnificent dynasty lie human stories of suffering that deserve to be remembered and understood. The silken chambers of the royal Alcazar have long since fallen silent, but the echoes of those degrading protocols remind us that true historical understanding requires us to examine not just the public face of power, but its most private and disturbing expressions. In remembering these stories, we honor not just the victims, but our obligation to recognize and resist such systems wherever they might emerge.